Okay, so now we are going to see how we can push what we learned in week 2 a little bit further. And the purpose now is going to be to do true goal-oriented programming, where we develop the program hand in hand with its proof of correctness. And just like in week 2 we started simple, we are going to start simple this time as well. And we're going to look at the skip command. So, the purpose of the game. You're giving a horde triple. You know what you want to be true before a command, you know what you want to be true after a command. And what you now want to do is figure out what that command should be. That's goal-oriented programming. So in our program this would appear as such, and then the idea would be that you want to somehow figure out a statement S for which you then know what the weakest precondition is, so that we can answer the question whether when you start in a state that satisfies Q, you are left in a state where R is true after you execute command S. Now let's look at the skip command. And the important thing to remember about the skip command is that the weakest precondition for skip, leaving you in a state where R is true, is that you have to already be in a state where R is true. Now what do we have here? Well, we have a code segment that might come from an if command where you are trying to increment variable c by 1 only if x is equal to 0. And this is the particular case in that if command where x is not equal to 0. Which means that before you get started x is not equal to 0 and the count is at some count. So the c hat here is the original contents of the count before we execute this code segment. And then upon completion it has to be the case that if x is equal to 0 the count has been increased by 1, and if x is not equal to 0 then the count is just left alone. And that's what the post condition says. Now we could of course go and guess that nothing needs to happen and that therefore the skip command is the appropriate choice. And actually that's perfectly okay, because you're using the horde triple here to determine what the command should be. But let's do it a little bit more methodically. What is the thought process that really should be going on in your head and or on paper? So what do we notice? Well, we notice that we have a precondition. And we notice that we have a post condition. And by now you are very familiar with weakening strengthening, and hopefully you immediately recognize that the precondition Q implies the post condition R by one of the weakening strengthening laws. And since that's the case, it sure would be nice if the weakest precondition for whatever command we execute is the post condition, because then we can assert that the precondition implies that weakest precondition. So all we need to do is come up with a command such that the weakest precondition of executing that command, leaving you in a state R, is R itself. And we know exactly what that command is. It is the skip command. So what happened here? We had a horde triple that defined what we wanted the code segment to do. We examined the precondition and post condition and noticed that the precondition already implies the post condition, and therefore we recognize that an appropriate command to pick is the skip command. Ta-da! You have derived your first code segment.